Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my name's Nigel Shadbolt, and I'm chairing this session on public-private partnerships for open government, which I think will prove to be a really important and interesting area. We will arrange the speakers. We're going to be doing a number of presentations, and then we will have a good amount of time for open discussion between us. I'm going to ask all the speakers if they wouldn't mind stepping up to the lectern to give their talks, because it's being web streamed. It's just a lot easier for them to track in. Without further ado, let me introduce, to start, Soon Gu-yoon, who is Director General of the Ministry of Security and Public Administration in the Republic of Korea, and they essentially have oversight for the open data effort initiative in Korea. I think the interesting thing, of course, here is to look at how at government levels, governments are tackling this challenge of private and public sector partnership, and we'll see particular examples as I introduce our panelists of how both public and private are benefiting from this two-way flow. So, Director General, could I ask you to give us a short presentation? Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me at this important gathering. I believe this workshop won't happen without a tireless effort of hosting country and organizers. I assure you of my country's full support and commitment to this OGP process. Today, everybody talked about the Open Government Initiative and transparency of government, so I have nothing new, to add. But as a sort of a food for thought, I'd like to share with you a few observations on this important agenda. In modern public governance, it's imperative for government to promote private and civil society's participation and engagement. In fact, it's fair to say that a civil society's participation itself in the public policy process has served as a significant yardstick to gauge how mature a democracy is, and also it also functions as effective tools to promote a government transparency. In addition, we realize that the complicated social issues cannot be easily resolved without a strengthening public-private partnership or governance. Against this backdrop, how government cooperate with civil societies is the key to determine the success of a public policies. Another key variable in this discussion worthy of our attention is the emergence of a new public service environment driven by mobile services and social networking site. In this regard, this panel discussion is all the more timely and useful because it seeks a collaboration with civil societies. This morning, Prime Minister Cameron talked about the striking differences between North and South Korea in terms of what both countries achieved and openness of government and rule of law, etc. His remarks was really inspiring me, and I was emboldened to present Korean government's new initiatives in these areas. For the purpose of providing more enhanced services and better collaborating with civil societies, the newly inaugurated Korean administration currently promotes a Government 3.0 as one of its key national agenda. The Gov 3.0 is a new paradigm for governance, which aims to provide a customized services for individuals by opening and sharing public information, facilitating communications and collaboration between government and civil societies. So I believe that the Government 3.0 and OGP have a lot in common. Among other things, they share similar objectives and methodologies. Firstly, almost all of public information related to people's lives is disclosed to the public under the Government 3.0. There is a crucial difference compared to the routine procedure of the past. The government used to disclose information after deliberations only when requested. Now, however, we open information even prior to request from the public. Such information and big data open to the public will serve as the basis for a further and useful information and encourage the participation of civil societies. The second, the Government 3.0 aims to build a close partnership between public and private sectors through diverse communication channels, both online and offline. Online channels are social networking site, text message, website, idea forum, while face-to-face channels include public and private advisory board on key issues. Let me tell you a case in point. A mobile application that allows smartphone users to inform the authorities of daily inconvenience, such as illegal parking, trash hazard, and receive immediate responses of how their report have been handled. In the case of key national policies of large project, idea forum would be appropriate to collect opinions from all walks of life before planning and implementations, thus realizing so-called collective intellect. In addition to e-platform, various conventional face-to-face meetings are also available. Disclosing information is prerequisite to government transparency when it comes to the disclosure and the use of large amount of information. However, privacy should be handled with care. That's why Korean government has put the privacy protection measures in place to prevent the leakage and illegal use of personal information and related incidents and crimes. With respect to communication and collaboration with citizens via e-government, we should not forget there are still the information poor, despite rapid development of ICT and the wide preference of smartphones. Along with, let me make a final footnote. Along with the United Nations, the Republic of Korea will host the United Nations Public Service Forum next year. It will be held from 23rd of June. The UNPSA Forum is considered as one of the most prestigious forums in public administration and governance. Under the theme of innovating governance, topics such as open and transparent government, e-government, the way forward for e-government, and the post-2015 development agenda will be discussed at the forums. So let me take this opportunity to ask your participations and share your wisdom on this important subject. Thank you.
Okay. Now, we've got a series of presentations. I just wanted to take an opportunity to actually talk about the work of one innovative solution. It's the Open Data Institute here in the UK. I'm the chairman and co-founder, along with Sir Tim Berners-Lee. And the whole idea of the Open Data Institute was to essentially, we're in receipt of public funds, £2 million a year over 5 years, but we're an independent, not-for-profit organisation. We're independent of government, and we have to seek our matched funding from industry, from NGOs, from other sources of funding. We've had great support from the World Bank with an exciting contract to work with them, from the Media Network, but also from commercial companies. Seriously, levels of engagement with companies like NTT, Quanta Computing, Which, Virgin Mobile, Telefonica. So we have this interesting model. And why is this interesting? Why are people doing this? It's because that in this world of open data, it's about not just data, it's about the standards, open standards. It's about the open source that you might use to drive your platforms. It's about open licenses. It's about open participation. And I think what we're going to see in many of the presentations is the power of open participation. We're going to see that with this benign set of open features, you get open innovation, and that is the prize. That is the prize we're all after. Innovation that can create not just social capital, but economic value and growth as well. Just to give you an idea of what the ODI does, we train. We try and get the public sector to produce better quality open data. We certify. We have open data certificates that now have been built into the UK action plan, so all data produced by the UK government is going to be adopting the open data certificate. But the fundamental idea is that if you're going to guarantee the supply of high-quality open data, you need to create a demand function for it. You need companies whose business models depend on it. You need organizations who are trying to deliver social capital whose business models depend on it. So we are very much about building the ecosystem of consumers and producers of services off the back of this data. And I'll give you just a couple of examples of that. And as a company, we're also very keen to be open. So we've announced 13 new nodes around the world who are adopting our open data charter and principles, and other nodes in the Open Data Institute family. And we have our key performance statistics, which tell us just how well we're doing. We're trying to turn the organization inside out, to be transparent about our performance. Now, you will hear probably in, some of you may have heard in other sessions, two of the examples of startups who we are incubating and developing through the Open Data Institute. One of them is Open Corporates, and we've heard a lot from the Prime Minister this morning about this whole commitment to beneficial ownership. It's a really good example where both private and public can get to grips with a problem that is really material and could have huge value, not just in terms of good governance, but in terms of understanding where liability falls. Liability often will associate with various forms of risk profiling, with insurance, with reinsurance. Endless ways. The data which open corporates are using here is a mix of data that it's scraped, that it's acquired from open registers, and is again a nice example of where support from both the private and public and the, if you like, non-governmental sectors has really been important. If you haven't seen their site, it's very worthwhile looking at some of the maps of beneficial ownership they've been generating. A second example is our another company, Prescription Analytics, is a site that's been produced by a company called Mastodon C, a small startup doing big data analysis on what? On the data that it's acquired from the National Health. In the UK, every month, our doctors, our GPs, publish as open data all the prescriptions they write. That's a remarkable data set. Not to who, but what the drug was. Each prescription, what the drug was and what the amount was. That allows them to do analyses of the patterns of prescribing. In 1 year, they noticed in the NHS that we spent £200 million more than we might have needed to do because we prescribed generic rather than, we prescribed patented rather than the generic cheaper drugs. For one type of drug, statins that control hypertension and blood pressure. Why all of those prescriptions were being written out when there was a cheaper version? Good question. But the interesting thing is the mix of actors involved in producing this data. Public data from the National Health. Private companies now commissioning this data and analysis back for insights into their own activity. Pharmaceutical companies interested in understanding the patterns of prescription across the country. And I think in all cases, what we see at the ODI is the opportunity to really build new kinds of partnership around open data as a platform, public participation, private participation. And it would be my pleasure now to introduce Oliver Bell, Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft, to share some of his experience about how Microsoft are seeing open data as a valuable contribution function for them. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to just open with a thank you to the State Department and the organisers of OGP for the opportunity to come and talk to you here today about some of the work that Microsoft is involved in this space. I have about 7 minutes to talk, and in preparation for this conversation, I reached out to several teams across Microsoft to ask for details on some of the work that we're doing around open data and open government. And I reached out to our team in the UK, who kindly sent me about 25 to 30 slides back on detailed information they're doing here in the country. I reached out to our team in Africa, who sent me a similarly large deck of about 40-odd slides of various projects that were underway in Africa. I reached out to our corporate team, who are over there, who sent me similarly a very large deck of slides back of things we're doing globally around preparation for platforms and working with governments. I sat down on last Friday to look at how do I distill this 150 slides into a 7-minute talk in some useful way. And the conclusion I came to is that when I look across those slides, there are several different modes of partnership that Microsoft's engaged in around the world that's helping support the work of open data advocates, ISVs, developers, and other organizations. So I thought one of the most useful things I could do is to run through 5 different modes of partnership and then share with you in each one of those modes an example of a project that's taking place. So for all the teams that helped me prepare, I apologize for not sharing all the detail, but I think it'll give you a good starting point. The first one I'd like to talk about is around focal points. So we're seeing increasingly in countries, organizations setting up focal points of work for developers and organizations interested in working with understanding open data and transparency in government. And there are organizations that provide space, room, tools, mentorship, all the other things that you might need to get started with this sort of work. And the example I'll pull out is an independent organization in Kenya that was formed by our colleagues from Ushahidi called iHub. And iHub is an organization that's really done a lot of work with open data in Kenya, helping the country understand it, helping the government understand what the value is. And with that organization, we very often turn up, help mentor developers, provide tools, other things that they need. And we're seeing these sorts of hubs appear in several countries around the world now. And for countries that are considering an establishment or an initiative along these lines, we'd very much encourage you to sort of dig deep into it, build it, and the commercial organisations will come and are keen to engage. So that was partnership number 1, is looking at the focal points and the work that takes place there. Partnership number 2 is around independent software vendors. And independent software vendors are one-man companies, 100-man companies, 100 individual companies, etc., building software, either free and open source software or tools that they ship as commercial products. And Microsoft has a program called BizSpark, which again provides tools and mentorship to companies that are starting up free of charge to get them off the ground in this area. And many of these companies today, many of these companies today are developing products that are significantly benefiting from the open data that's being published around the world, how they process it and how they work with it. And there's a couple of examples that are here with us on the festival hall this week, these 2 days that I'll bring out. One is a company called Shoot Hill, which have some very powerful data visualization tools. They're working with the government here in the UK to look at how they might publish flood alerts, river levels, other environmental information using their visualization tools. An example of that's on the festival hall downstairs. The other example is a product called Love Clean Streets, which some of you in the UK will be familiar with, which is a tool for reporting fly tipping, garbage that's been dropped, other bits and pieces. And that's interesting from all sorts of points of view. One, it was one of the early examples from here in the UK of integrating, using these sort of services to integrate with open services in government. But number 2, it's one that we've seen picked up in various other parts of the world. And the example the UK team talked to me regularly about is when Hurricane Sandy happened in the US, where this is a tool that was built for London and delivered in the UK. When Sandy happened, people were using it in New Jersey to report things that need to be done in New Jersey. So these really are sort of a global impact and making a global difference. So that's ISVs. My third example is around some of the humanitarian response work, disaster response work. And again, this is something Microsoft's been engaged in for many years. I think when I look at the disaster response work we're involved in maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it's this flurry of activity in a country that it's often very hard to then replicate and do something with or build useful tools around. Today we work very closely with NetHope, who are an NGO that many of you will probably know. NetHope have an initiative called the Open Humanitarian Initiative, which is really looking at 2 things. They're looking at how do we help countries pre-prepare open data sets and data that will be useful in the event of a disaster. So how do we have information about who needs to step in, which organizations, which data sets, having some of that pre-ready to do something with. The second thing they're working on is an XML schema called Hexel, HXL, that allows us to transfer data between organizations and give us a very easy way of when you look at Haiti or other natural disasters, many organizations turn up, and Hexel provides us with a way of transferring data from organization to organization, so we understand the logistics, the supply chain, other things in countries. So we're working very closely with some of the humanitarian organizations on those sorts of initiatives, and I'd encourage you to look at the work that NetHope's doing in that space. My fourth partnership mode is around how do we as a company pre-prepare tools that would help countries around the world or cities around the world host their own data and do something with it. And the example I'll bring out here, again, they're in the festival hall, go and talk to them and dig deeper, is Socrata. So Socrata is one of the big providers of an open data platform. We've done a lot of work to bring them into the cloud, bring to a state where if you're a government that wants to host open data, we can take the complexity of deploying the technology out of the conversation. Really, it's like you turn the tools on in the cloud and do something with it rather than spending a long time thinking about how you'll host. You can think about what the data is and what impact it's going to have for you in your country and your environment. My final mode of partnership is looking at how we then partner with governments. I think this has been sort of the longest standing mode of partnership for Microsoft in this space. And I'll bring out two examples. One is with the Cabinet Office and Met Office here in the UK around weather data and weather information. And this is data that's hosted in the cloud, it's hosted on Azure. What we can do in this space is really help them manage the load. So if you look at draws on weather data and open data, there's a pretty consistent request as people check the weather every morning when they wake up. But every now and again, there's an event like there was here in the UK on Monday, where there's an amazing amount of global interest in what that weather data actually is, and the spike in demand sort of climbs to something astronomical. In the cloud, we can help manage some of those things. So that partnership with government really helps manage those spikes and complexity. And my final example is a project called Eye on Earth, which is a project that began with the European Environment Agency in about 2009, and was really looking at how do we take their data on air quality and water quality around Europe, put that on a map, and then allow citizens to crowdsource sort of matching data. So how accurate is the European Environmental Agency's data in itself? Where is it changing? Where are citizens telling new things that have been happening around that? And Eye on Earth's now been live for about 3 or 4 years. It's been pretty consistently used and demonstrated around the world. And our colleagues at Esri are now helping replicate that to be used in other scenarios, for example, the Great Barrier Reef down in Australia and other places where government data, citizen crowdsourced data, gives a good environmental story around what's happening there. So there were 5 modes of operation, 5 modes of partnership. Looking at some of the focal points, the work with ISVs, the humanitarian space, hosting and preparing, making tools easier, and then the partnerships with government. I think what I'm trying to demonstrate there is this open data conversation starts off being just about data, but it's really about every part of areas where a company like Microsoft does business and every way that we touch sort of society and citizens. Thank you.
Okay, trying to keep time on this. It's about 7 or 8 minutes piece. So Dowdy from Ushahidi, please tell us a little bit about your exciting work with an organisation which is very much born of the public spirit.
Okay, thank you for the invitation, for being here, the Government of UK State Department. We appreciate it. So waiting for the presentation. Yeah. So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you, I'm from Kenya. If you don't greet me back, I'll stay here forever. So I thought I'd speak to the entrepreneurs in the house a little bit about government data, why it's important, and a couple of things you can do with it. So, why should entrepreneurs care about government data at all? Is there anything in it for us, for startups, for people who are starting out with their own companies? And I think I can give you, 4 reasons that we found at Ushahidi why government data is important. First of all, government data is official data. It's the data that's used to make policy. It's the data that's used to run our countries. If you want to influence government policy, if you want to change the way things are done, you usually have to do it on the basis of government data. If you feel the government data is wrong, then you need to lobby to get those data sets changed into official government data sets, because that's what's used to make decisions. Secondly, government data is comprehensive. When a government does a census, it counts everyone in the country. And not many other organizations can do that, where you can cover a broad range, the whole entire population of a country when you're collecting your data. So that's the second reason why government data is important. A third reason is that it's verified. Governments spend a lot of time cleaning their data, going through it, making sure that the data is verified, that it's correct before they release it out to the public. So that's another reason why government data should be exciting and interesting to entrepreneurs. And fourthly, government data is expensive. You pay for it as a taxpayer. Picture there of my home city, Nairobi, one of the most expensive cities in the world, and government data is equally expensive. So as a taxpayer, you need to be concerned about this expensive data that you pay for, and maybe start thinking about different ways that you can make money from it. So now that we've established that government data is relevant for entrepreneurs, let's look at a couple of things we can do with that data. 4 roles that entrepreneurs can use government data for. First thing we have to do is make data accessible. We've heard a lot about, getting data into hands of the ordinary citizens. we found as Shahidi and at the iHub that technology works best when the people it's intended for don't have to learn any new skills or don't have to buy any new devices to interact with that data. So as entrepreneurs, especially those of us in the tech world, we have a responsibility here to build tools that allows people with the technology they have in their hands already to use the government, to use open data sets that are out there. So if you're developing tools in Africa, it means you have to look at SMS. If you're developing tools for the youth, you have to look at social media, etc., and see how you can integrate your platform into this. Another thing we have to do is make government data digestible, perhaps a bit more digestible than brown ugali, which we eat on our side of the continent. And by making the data digestible, we mean, it's not enough for the data to be accessible to people. They have to understand the context, what it means. A couple of years ago in Kenya, we had a big conversation about overpopulation in the country. And a senior government official said, the answer to this overpopulation issue is to sterilize women. But when you went and looked at the data, it showed you that women with no education had more children than women with primary school education, who had less children than, who had more children than women with high school education, and by the time it got to university education, women were only having around 2 children each. So in that context, now that you have the data, is the correct response to overpopulation in Kenya to sterilize women or to educate more women? So again, that's making the data that may be already accessible, digestible to the people who are using it. A third reason is that we need to create demand for relevant data. As we've heard, data has to be driven by the demand side. If there's no point releasing random socio-economic data when everyone is in election mode. Around election season, people want election data. They want election boundaries. They want polling stations. They want data on who the candidates are, where they're standing, what the policies are. So again, that's another thing that entrepreneurs can get involved in, creating this demand for relevant data. And a fourth thing they can do, close the feedback loop. Now that we have the data and put it in the hands of ordinary citizens and allowing them to raise their concerns to their governments, we have to be able to close that feedback loop, to use this data to follow up on governments, to say, hey, have things changed? Have you implemented the promises that you said you would in reaction to what citizens have raised with you? So just again, another picture of food to get to you. It's really about having your cake and eating it. Data in itself is not knowledge. So all these different things I think you can see from the slides there, data, knowledge, presentable, and finally how it all comes together in a context that makes sense. Finally, at Shahidi, together with our friends at Hivos and Ideas, we're part of a grand challenge called Making All Voices Count, where we're trying to find those entrepreneurs, those outliers who are creating applications, who are coming up with innovations that allow citizens to connect themselves to government and to get government's feedback response to make governments more efficient. And thank you. Those are my 5 minutes.
And if I could call on Nigel Sides now, please, from World Resources Institute, where Nigel is Director for Forest Programmes, to give us a perspective again from the, I guess, from the public side.
Well, thank you very much. World Resources Institute is a global think tank. We work at the intersection of environmental policy and sustainability and economic development. And I'm going to talk to you today about something that's a little different from a lot of what we've been hearing about at this meeting so far. We've heard a lot about revenue and transparency around public administration of funds and so on. And I'm going to take us into the natural resources sector, and I'm going to talk about forests and water, and 2 global partnerships working with companies, governments and others to transform transparency around how these resources are being managed and monitored. These both are global in scale and I think illustrate some of the exciting ways that we can work with the private sector and also have an impact on the private and public sectors around these kinds of issues. And I also just want to thank Larry Sperling and the State Department for organizing this session and for enabling this all to happen. So first of all, starting off with forests. One country in the world has reduced significantly rates of deforestation over the last 10 years or so, and that is Brazil. And it's reduced them by a staggering 80%. Deforestation rates in the Brazilian Amazon have dropped by 4/5 since 2004. And a significant piece of the story here is Brazil's investment in remote sensing technology and making near real-time data about where illegal forest clearing is taking place directly accessible to enforcement agencies and others so they can take action in the right places right away. Unfortunately, it's almost unique in that sense. Most countries, most governments and organizations still depend on information like this, printed reports, PDFs, that have data in them about forests that's typically 4, 5, 6 years out of date by the time it's published. Absolutely useless for taking action to deal with issues on the ground. And yet we all take this kind of information completely for granted. This is the BBC website. You can look at the Bloomberg website, where thousands of companies' data, hundreds of economies' information is updated every single second. It's extremely easy to access and use. It's completely free. It's available in many languages. Why don't we have information like this about the critical resources that we all depend upon for our survival? So we believe that it's time, we're overdue for a new approach in how we're monitoring natural resources. And Global Forest Watch basically aims to become a Bloomberg for forests, if you like, to take the enormous risk that is out there but is currently inaccessible in the archives of the space agencies and so on, and make it accessible and easy to use for the many managers, governments, NGOs and others who could use that information to make much better decisions. And the good news is that a revolution that's been going on in remote sensing with satellite technology and cloud computing and our ability to share information and social networking and so on actually enable us to do this. And over the last couple of years, we've pulled together a rather unusual partnership that has built Global Forest Watch. And I'll particularly highlight, given the topic of our panel here, 4 companies that are very involved in that work: Google and their cloud computing systems, Esri, leaders in geographic information systems and analysis, Planet Labs, a company that's disrupting the remote sensing space, and Scanx, which is it's a Russian company, it's sort of the Walmart of satellite technology. It takes expensive satellite technology and makes it widely accessible at low cost. And this is what they look like when you all put them in a room together, which generates an absolutely wonderful discussion and strategy session. And this is what Global Forest Watch looks like at the moment. This is the beta version. It's a map of the world, and you can click on that map. It's as easy as finding your way to the supermarket with a Google map, assuming you can do that, which I think most of us can. And you open it up, and you have a set of pull-down menus at the top, which instantly display information, which in its current form prior to this is extremely complex and hard to access. So here you can see intact forests around the world. You can see the mining concessions across the Congo Basin there. You can see all the world's protected areas thanks to a UNEP database. And you can see a feed of all the news stories about forests coming in and updated in real time on the site. If we zoom into Indonesia, I'll just show you one application of the system. We go into West Kalimantan and get closer and closer here. With one click, you've got all the oil palm concessions across Kalimantan. Oil palm accounts for about 22% of forest clearing in Indonesia currently. And as we can go in closer and closer here, there are the protected areas. And zooming in further, we can start to see where deforestation is taking place. And I'll just quickly go through this. The pink pixels there show where clearing is taking place. And this data is updated every 16 days. So we've gone from data that's years and years out of date to data that's updated every 16 days on a website that everyone can use. And thanks to Google Translate, it's also available in many, many languages. And you can immediately see, for example, that that company there is clearing an area outside of its concession potentially. We click on the concession and we can see the name of the company and who owns it. We can see the clearing going on here in protected areas, so that would help to direct enforcement efforts to address that within days of it taking place. You can subscribe to alerts from the system, so if you're interested in a particular area, you tell it, and it will email you an update as alerts appear. That's the top-down part, and then there's the crowdsourcing component. So thousands and thousands of NGOs around the world have a lot of information about these resources and want to share it. The system also enables them to do that, and that's then combined with the remote sensing data. That's just the beginning, though. Higher resolution information is now available thanks to work by the University of Maryland and Google. This is going to be published in Science quite soon, we understand. And here you can see, for example, the British Isles. It's not just a tropical issue, it's a global issue. Here you have the highly conflicted region between England and Scotland. And there you can see forest loss and forest gain. That information is updated annually for the entire planet at a resolution of only 30 meters, and that information is being available through this system as well. So just touching briefly on water and the Aqueduct Alliance, another partnership that we've convened. Here we're bringing companies together in a rather different way. Here they're providing funding and have developed a tool with us specifically to address water risk issues. And just to show you very quickly what that looks like, here's a global water risk map. You can see here in China the overlap between water risk and coal-fired power station development plans, showing that half of those power stations are actually in areas of very, very high water risk, which is, of course, a huge issue. Threats to food. 50% of the world's food is produced through irrigation. And here you overlap food production with water risk as well. You see the issues there, let alone with the dynamics around climate change. And even national security here. There are interesting analyses being done around the Syria conflict, around issues in Yemen, which indicate, among other things, that these may be related to severe drought and water stress, which, of course, contribute to social tension as well. And you can start to see that with these kinds of maps as well. So just to summarize here, the technology companies are helping us to turbocharge these systems. It helps companies to credibly disclose information as well. It supports companies' risk management work and gives them a level playing field. You can see the legal and the illegal here and start to differentiate that and take action on that in near real time. And more broadly, we hope that this creates new benchmarks in transparency around how natural resources are managed. It's helpful for corporate supply chain management. Companies like Unilever and Walmart and so on can use this to ensure that deforestation isn't taking place in their supply chains, and they have committed to do that. It helps governments focus their enforcement efforts. It creates pressure on companies and governments to disclose information. If we've got this wrong, then they need to share what's right if they're unhappy about that. And it gives real-time watchdogs and whistleblowers and others the tools that they need to campaign more effectively. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, these create a platform for local people to get involved in sharing and discussing what all this information needs. Thank you very much.
And on to our last presentation, and then we'll get into the discussion phase of this panel. Stephen Lease from is the Public Sector Practice Leader, actually for ESRI, referenced and called out in that last presentation. I'd very much like to hear why a thoroughgoing capital-based company is so interested in these partnerships.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And my job is to start to get you thinking about the questions you're about to ask, and to pull together some of the thoughts that you've just heard. So I'd like to really focus on how. You've heard clearly today from people from the Prime Minister down about what needs to be done and why it should be done. But I think where it can fall down on stony ground is in the how. And I think there are a number of aspects to this. The first is I do feel that having a focal point within a country where excellence can be brought to bear, Open Data Institute, is critical to these matters. We've also heard from Microsoft on the types of models that potentially might work, and I think you need to reflect on the fact that we do see a lot of this on a daily basis, and we do have perhaps a view on what benchmark looks like, best practice. And you've also seen some wonderful examples, and I didn't want to show any more examples because the last one clearly showed that. So let me just talk about the how specifically. So my job is I'm the general manager of a business in the UK looking after government and health. And I've seen a lot of public-private partnerships start and also so many successful ones. And perhaps I can just characterise to you those ideas so that you can perhaps know what good looks like and perhaps take those ideas back. Because invariably you're going to go home and want to try and replicate some of this yourself. And I think there's a clear distinction between government knowing what and why it should be done, and then asking a suitable partner, commercial partner, perhaps on the how, because that's what we spend our daytime doing. And let me just give you 3 specific examples of that. The first one is the Metropolitan Police. They have a responsibility to provide information to the financial services community in the UK. And they clearly know that that's their responsibility, but they did take the step to say, well, actually, our job is not then to go and do it. We will bring somebody else help us to go to market. So they clearly knew how to commission a piece of work that was relevant to their needs. And I could take a similar view with the former Financial Services Authority, who also see in that community that their job is to regulate, but not necessarily to get the regulation out on a day-to-day basis to the financial services community, i.e. bring somebody else to bear on that. And then perhaps a knottier problem, the Health and Safety Executive, whose job is to get regulation out there, but they recognise their reach is limited. And again, recognising that they are good at commissioning, but then bring the partner in to do such work. And I think what that means then is if you can then bring together a public organisation with a clear view and a private organisation with a capability that's relevant, and Microsoft and ourselves certainly have got experience in that, then you could almost write most of this down on a single page and have something up and running very quickly. I think the more complexity and the more time you spend trying to write down precisely what must be done is probably, I would suggest, wasted effort. And I just wanted to take one example of something that, to me, actually had come out of best practice in local government. And it was a local authority that wanted to inform its parents, the parents in their local community, of where their children should go to school. And they came up with a very simple approach, which was basically put your postcode in, it will tell you where you are, where your nearest school is. But the thing that made the difference was not that, because that was very basic, I would suggest. It was, and where's the nearest bus route to put so you can get your children to school? And what's the travel time? And where's the secondary school? And if we do buy our house in this area, are we in the right area, catchment area? And what has happened is that was built very quickly, very thoughtfully, but it has allowed that organisation to remove large swathes of front-facing telephone staff. It's allowed them to have a very clear and transparent approach, and also remove the expertise from the back office, because it's clearly all through this new transparent approach. And that makes impact. And what time frame was that? Well, it was about 30 days to get it up and running. But I would go back to my original point, which is if you know what you want to do and why, and then you speak to the right people, the how becomes relatively easy. And perhaps that's the point to end on, and elicit questions from you on perhaps the broader canvas that is the audience here. Okay.
Okay, I'd like to turn over to the floor now, and what I'd like to do is gather a couple of questions quickly together from the floor, and if you could keep them succinct and state who you are and your affiliation. Yes, thank you. First question there? Yeah.
Speak up?
Yeah, speak up, why not?
My name is Ivo Ivanovsky, I'm the Minister of IT from Macedonia.
There is one. I've got roving mics. That'll put it onto the feed then, yeah.
Once you get the microphone, you never want to leave it. So. Quick question, maybe Sir Nigel, you can answer it. Have you been in a position where government institutions that have the best data, they survive by selling their data? Central Registry, many institutions. How do you stimulate them, or what is the business model that you can convince them to open the data for private sector to develop applications on their web services, to give it to the citizens? That's one question. And quick questions to Mr. Nigel from the World Research Institute. Is the Global Forest Watch for free application, and can government institutions especially, add to the map and maybe use that map to find the people that abuse the forests in any country? Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start with that question, because you have probably a quick answer to that, I hope.
Yes, it is free, it's completely free, and yes, governments can use it, hopefully, to do what you say. I will comment on your first question, though, with a very interesting example, which is Landsat satellite data. NASA did not used to make that publicly available. They then released it all through the US Geological Survey, and there were several orders of magnitude increase in the use then of that information and development of apps on top of it. It's an absolutely stunning and compelling example of why releasing data for free, even highly complex data, can have incredibly good consequences, and it's actually stimulated the European space agencies and other space agencies to look at a similar approach and put pressure on them, peer pressure on them to do the same, which is absolutely, we couldn't do any of this without that kind of information being available for free.
So, and I just amplify that. It is a really challenging problem where governments have decided to charge for their data and in fact set up structures where the departments can only exist by the charge-out models. You've got these perverse situations where there are monopoly rents being paid, essentially monopoly institutions within government. They have to charge a rent. The trick is to try and persuade, and it's a long road, is to try and persuade them that it's in their own interest. So we have a great example in the UK where an organisation that used to pay for its data, it also used to pay. It used to charge for its data. It also used to pay a lot for its own internal innovation of that data. So it had software teams, developers, it paid for these apps to be built. Now it's making the data available. That cost has gone away. It's actually getting the innovation done for it. So there are lots of compelling examples where the return on investment is greater even for the organisations who would charge for it. But if you've got to get to the Treasury, you've got to persuade them that the economic benefits of information at scale dwarf the local benefits to the local organisation. And that's, every battle is hard in that area. We could have a beer and discuss, some of the kind of guerrilla tactics you have to adopt, but every battle is hard. Anybody else in contribution on that? Because it's a big topic, yeah.
Can I be the outlier on this one? Who owns government data? I think I thought we had solved this question a couple of decades ago, that government data is owned by the citizens of the country. So why would the government sell me something that belongs to me? It's
they want to.
Yeah, it's government data is owned by the citizens of the country. You may be able to make a case about selling it to foreigners, but then now that's a whole murky. But the citizens of a country should have access to the data that their government generates. That's what I do.
Here. Okay. More questions? Yes. The gentleman here. And any more questions in the queue? So we can get some more questions in the queue? Yeah.
Hi. Sorry, another UK voice. I'm Simon Wilson from In Business for Good. We're a small business network. And what we're interested in is the broader social role of small businesses. I was really interested by Dowdy's presentation in particular about how small businesses can get involved in using data. And we've got this kind of, it seems to me there's this thing about big data and big names like Microsoft and Google, and yet the potential for small businesses to use and own it. I'm trying to interest small businesses in this agenda. So what are the things that you would suggest should most interest small entrepreneurial businesses about this agenda?
I guess, every country is different. In Kenya, for example, we had a big gap in the use of education data in, classroom size ratio, the quality of, schools and exam results. So we had lots of, small entrepreneurs building education apps around that. We had, in the health sector, around waiting times, around even where your local hospital is, apps around that, and where government pharmacies are and which drugs are available, should be available in which government pharmacies. So again, I'm sure in the UK, you may find that the gaps are different, but again, you have to solve a problem. You have to be solving a problem, saving people either time or money.
Okay.
Hi, Larry Sperling from the U.S. State Department. And one of the ideas of this panel session was to start a conversation about how to engage the private sector along with civil society and government to work together in bringing together the three legs of the stool, the three sectors, to enhance open government. So I want to put this question to the panel, but also to folks in the audience, and because we're going to begin this discussion today and continue it tomorrow, creating a small team of folks that are going to take a look at recommendations to make to the steering committee, make to OGP on how to better engage private sector in the effort. So the first question in my mind in that inquiry is, what are the incentives, what are the motivations, why should an organization like Microsoft, or even beyond the ICT sector, why should an extractive industry or name any sector, consumer goods, why should they support this effort? What is it about open government that is in their interests?
Okay. We ask Oliver to kind of feel
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
you give us the answer.
Let's start with that. I talked a little bit about some of those things in my different modes of partnership, and I think when I look at the way we measure the success of our business, it has a lot to do with partners, ISVs, developers, and companies working around us, whether they're people who are writing software as a business or people who are using the tools that we provide to run other small to medium-sized businesses elsewhere in the ecosystem. And I think when I look at the last 5 years, Larry, it's evolved from open government data being something interesting to being something that is a core part of almost every one of those conversations. So from our point of view, I think we've got a responsibility to look at how do we provide better tools, make it easier, make it enable more organizations to use this data. And then as part of the task team conversation is to look at what's the common language that you use to help each other understand what the various complexities of this conversation is. I think when you look at a lot of other development efforts, it's sort of look at a problem, build a solution. In this particular one, there's complex institutions, organizations, history, legislation, and other things involved. So I think a large part of what we're going to do through the task team meeting that meets tomorrow is begin to have that discussion and look at how we take something that's already quite impactful and broaden it even further by understanding each other further.
We started a little late, so I'm going to beg indulgence and probably keep you just a few minutes for your coffee. We're also going to have a wrap-up from Nick in a moment. So any comments on this piece?
Yeah, very briefly. It's an excellent question, Larry. So why should consumer goods companies, extractives, and others care about this? I'd highlight three things. A level playing field. So if you're responsible, you want to have a fair playing field to play on with those who are breaking the law. This helps identification of those who may be breaking the law. Risk reduction, potential risks in your supply chain, the open corporates work, knowing who you're doing business with, who do those companies actually belong to, and contract compliance. So are your suppliers and those down your supply chain and others you're doing business with actually doing what they say they were doing? Currently, certification systems and others are used for social and environmental compliance monitoring independently. Those reports are out of date as soon as the certifiers and auditors get on the plane and head home and cost thousands of dollars to produce. Using these kinds of monitoring systems and other data sources, you can sort of triangulate and monitor what's actually happening independently, and often at very low cost.
Okay. Is there one more question before we move to a wrap-up? Any more questions? Okay, people are clearly caffeine low. Nick, if I could ask you to stand up and perhaps give us a bit of a wrap-up session there. Nick Sinai, who is Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the US Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House.
Excellent. Well, I'll keep it very quick because I know everyone wants to get out of here and get a coffee. But I was just struck in listening to this group about what an amazing set of different models of partnership with civil society and with the private sector. And they're really specific and they're impactful, and there are ways that align incentives. And I think that's really an important thing, is you have to say, well, why is this important to the corporation? Why is this important to civil society? Why is this important to governments? And in the variety of partnership models, from a grand challenge to co-funding to use of the data, we talked to collaboration models, a whole host of both formal and informal public-private partnerships. I think thinking about those incentives are really important. Our own U.S. Department of State has a great global partnerships office. They've helped mobilize, I think, $650 million of resources of public and private. And so internationally, we do a ton of work in this area. Domestically, one of the things that I do is I help lead the open data initiatives for the president. And in fact, we have experimented with a lot of partnership models there. We kind of have these informal workshops with users of data. And I think that's actually really important, whether they're entrepreneurs, whether they're nonprofits, whether they're large corporations, but actually bringing them in the room, putting some data on the table and saying, this is what we have, these are some of our policy objectives, but bringing in an interdisciplinary group and seeing what they can do. And it really has brainstormed some really great, not just apps, but services, companies, nonprofits, and help create those feedback loops. And I think that's actually what's really important here is, as I think about all of these partnership models and why they're successful, is they have these great feedback loops where kind of have mutual incentives to succeed. And look, the president is really committed to continuing to open data. We had a series of commitments that we've actually announced today. We're really inspired by the UK ODI model, Sir Nigel, so we're actually going to try that in the US as well. This would be outside of government, but a partner that we could, a nonprofit that we could collaborate with. And, you know, I have a couple specific examples of companies where there's real economic wealth creation, job creation, helping Americans. And I think I'll just kind of close with those, because these are uses of U.S. government data, like the Landsat data, which I think is tremendously valuable. And we're frankly just scratching the surface there. And so an example I talked about earlier was a company called Climate Corporation that helps farmers in very concrete ways with apps and weather insurance, and just got purchased by Monsanto for $1 billion. It's a great example of a startup in 2006. A company called O-Power helps Americans with their energy bills. They've helped American families save $300 million. I think they have something like 400 or 500 employees. They use open weather data, energy trend data, all kinds of data from the U.S. government, and the real estate industry too. So you think about the Zillows, the Redfins, the Trulias. Some of them are public companies, some of them are private companies. They use data from our Department of Labor, our Department of Housing, and other places as well, helping Americans with fundamental questions of where are they going to live, where are they going to raise their family, and so forth. So I'm really excited about these different partnership models. There's ones where we're setting a kind of a grand ambition, and we're all kind of working towards things together in commitment models. There's kind of these co-funding models. Some really impressive work that I think this panel has done, and I'm really excited to continue to work with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Vin. Thank you very much, Nick. Okay, well, look, it just falls to me to kind of close out this session and to do two things. One is to say this is a continuous journey, and it's important to note that from today's discussion, we've seen a lot of heuristics, a lot of good advice, and different models, as Nick said. Tomorrow we welcome people to help join in the conversation, come to the conversation. The first meeting of the task team on private sector engagement is convening at 12:45 tomorrow in bilateral room 3, 4th floor, bilateral room 3, the Byron room on 4th floor of this building. The task team is going to be developing recommendations to the OGP steering committee, and that's an open invitation at this point. Is that right?
People from OGP partner countries, whether you're government, private sector, civil society, and you can bring your lunch.
Okay, great. Well, how good is that? Okay, bring your lunch. And it is to shape the agenda, and that's what's so exciting about this meeting in general and this field, is that we are shaping new kinds of policy agenda. And just a final point, can I thank Larry Sperling and the State Department of the United States for actually helping organize this panel for us. Thank you. And my panelists, thank you.